Looking into the unknown. It takes courage to look into the unknown. If we don't have that courage, we attempt to cauterize and bandage the unknown. We paste labels on the unknown and want it to flow into the shape of our expectations. When we attempt to gaze into the future, we encounter the horizon line of the unknown. Some unknowns are more unformed than others, and what we think we perceive of unformed unknowns is highly unreliable. So, for example, using my timeline as an example, it is perfectly formed that one day I will die. However, the time and manner of it may be unformed, or it might actually be formed. For example, perhaps the time and manner will have to do with like my poor dietary choices. Actually, I eat a great diet even by Boulder standards, but I try and do fentanyl only on the weekends, but maybe, one day I slip up and it was because of my bad choice, or I went too fast on my e-bike or something. Or if I was living in the 7th century in Pompeii, I might, regardless of whatever dietary choices I might make or risks I might take, there was a geological clock working silently in the background, and it was just going to erupt at a particular time. If there were sufficiently advanced volcanologists at the time, they probably could have predicted that time, but there weren't. And regardless of the health choices or psychological profile or karma of all the people living in Pompeii at that time, they were all going to get taken out within the same time frame, regardless. And that was somewhat of a formed event. And similar with me, it could be that that the timing of my death will be because a really advanced AGI, a super AI, in other words, decides to release a tsunami of diamondoid nanobots that will sweep across the planet, digesting every organic molecule to harvest the atoms to make a Dyson sphere-like solar collector to cover the whole planet to power its energy-hungry CPU or something like that. We just don't know. So in the immortal words of Donald Rumsfeld, and I don't support his Iraq policy, but I was watching live when he said this at a press conference. Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. Known unknowns, unknown unknowns, unknowable, unformed unknowns. What aspects of the unknown should we be looking into? Well, earlier today, there was a unknown, mostly unknown, but maybe I should have been looking into it more. And I did 10 videos and found out that the audio was missing on all of them. I had this problem once before, but I didn't think it was necessary to stop and check each video. So it wasn't a completely unknown possibility, but I didn't know that was happening. So I wasted a lot of effort, and now this is take 3 on the same video. But that's the kind of thing we're constantly facing in life. However, the area of the unknown you are most likely to be able to look into and most need to look into are the unknown areas of you. As Socrates said, know thyself, the best 2 words of advice ever given. There can be no greater moral imperative than that. Violence, physical, psychological, and environmental, is almost always perpetuated by people who do not know themselves. So right now we have, in 2024, I believe, a I shouldn't even say I believe, I know there is a collective psychosis going on both the left and on the right. And what both sides have in common is that they project their shadow onto the other side. And that's easy to do because there is a hook in both the right and left to project a shadow on them, because there's crazy people on both sides. However, they don't stop and locate the shadow on their side very well. And what we don't locate in ourselves, we are likely to find outside ourselves. So, both Bush, father and son, have said proudly, I don't psychoanalyze myself. I'm trying to do my George W. Bush accent, not George H.W. Bush. I only look in the mirror when I'm shaving. What you don't know about yourself, you project out into the world, and this is the most dangerous form of unknowing. George W. Bush expressed this attitude of taking pride even in not knowing about yourself. In something he said, quoted in Vanity Fair in October of 2000, I'm not really the type to wander off and sit down and go through deep wrestling with my soul. And then on June 4th, 2003, aboard Air Force One, he said, I'm also not really analytical. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about myself, about why I do things. Right, because he's a man of action. He's the decider, as he put it, and working on his strategery and that kind of thing. And, but we know the consequences of that. And what he didn't know that was in his own unconscious, Freud, in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, and published in 1900, this is where we got the idea of Freudian slips, is that things that are in your unconscious but you don't know will come out as slips of the tongue. And nobody did more slips of the tongue than George W. Bush. For example, he said, and this was in Washington, D.C. on August 5th, 2004, our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we. And then, this was January 10th, 2005. Who could have possibly envisioned an election in Iraq at this point in history? Said that at the White House. You have a crucial responsibility. Okay, well, actually, before I move on from his slips, much more recently, just a few weeks ago, here in 2024, another Freudian slip from George W. Bush. After, to be fair to him, he does seem a bit repentful. He did kind of go to his room and spend the last 20 plus years doing amateur oil paintings and stuff like that. And he'd probably be a much wiser president right now. But through the miracle of iPad technology, plus my inability to do video editing, I'm going to show you something from just a few weeks ago. Just got to hit the play button.
Imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway, 75.
Okay. That's not because of being 75.
I'm not laughing. And I'm guessing.
That's because of a lack of self-knowledge. And that resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties in an unnecessary war. So, you have a crucial responsibility to look into your unknowns. Look into the unknown areas of your key relationships, the hidden sources of conflicts, and the aspects of yourself and others you haven't seen. So, like Nietzsche said, be careful in battling monsters that you don't become a monster. Right? Begin by locating your own darkness. Careful who your enemies are. You'll tend to become more like them. And as Goethe said, people on the left or right of this country, take note, if you want to clean up the whole world, begin with your own doorstep. And what is your own doorstep? For those of you listening, I'm pointing toward my head. It's your psyche. I almost never believe in one-size-fits-all formulations, but a principle I recommend as universal is to avoid getting deeply entangled in a romantic relationship or other major commitment with someone until you know the shadow side of their personality. And that presumes you have some familiarity with the shadow side of your personality. Otherwise, you'll be projecting, you'll locate their shadow, but it'll actually be a projection of your own shadow onto them. Everyone has a shadow. So if you don't see it in the other, if they seem just about perfect, you're almost certainly blinded by idealization and or infatuation. Beware. The unknown shadow aspects of yourself and the other will blindside you. Know as much as you can of the others in your life, but always respect their otherness. Respect that you will never fully know them, just as you can't fully know yourself, just as I can't fully know myself. If I fully knew myself, I would know all the secrets of the universe because they have all gone into making me myself. So I've learned a lot of things about myself, but I can never stop learning about myself because I will never finish that task or of knowing anybody else. Some aspects of ourselves and others are unformed and cannot be known until they actualize in a still unformed future. Like when I used to be a wilderness guide and would take people mountain climbing, they may have been people that were never under extreme survival pressure before, and suddenly you find out the person who seemed together cracks, and somebody who was highly neurotic keeps it together, and now the future reveals something that was unknown when you were checking everybody's pack on the ground at base camp. The less you know about yourself, the more likely you are to imagine you know the future. A naive person will look toward the horizon line of the future through a glass darkly and see a distorted reflection of the unknown parts of themselves, especially their fears and desires. So, and here's an extreme case of that. So I'm the discoverer of what I call the singularity archetype. You can read the book free on the website. You can see a 2-hour video on the website called Looking Toward the Event Horizon. And the singularity archetype relates to the parallel event horizons of death and species metamorphosis. Every archetype has a dark side. The most prominent dark side of the singularity archetype is apocalypticism. And so far, apocalypticism seems to be all about projection because of any human endeavor that's been highly popular since the late Paleolithic. It's the only one I can think of that has a 100% failure rate, higher than even diets or romantic relationships. End-time prophecies have always been wrong so far. So what I discovered about that is that what would happen is a very large, irreducible psychic factor in a lot of people is fear of death. Rather than face that, they project it out and like, I can feel it. This could all be gone. Oh, it's the whole world that is coming up to an end time. But they're really just feeling the approach of their own event horizon. So, for example, in the early 1960s, there was a woman named Elizabeth Steen who was a homemaker and also a self-proclaimed psychic, and somehow she got known for proclaiming a very particular date when she said that there'd be a apocalyptic earthquake in California. And she was sincere about this at great expense. She had her whole family move from the Bay Area to I think the state of Washington. And then and this was such a big cultural phenomenon. Others copycat faux psychics picked up the date and said, we've seen it too. And there were several New York Times articles about this because it was such a cultural phenomenon. Well, the date arrived and no earthquake. But Elizabeth Steen, who was only maybe in her early 30s or something, was not there to see it because a short time before that, she died of a rare medical condition not usually fatal. So this is what can happen when we project the unknown parts of ourself out into the world. We get a false radar return. Consider this an auspicious time to summon the courage to look deeply into the unknown, but have humility about it and realize that we can only see so far into it.